All right, guys, welcome to the Crazy Pills podcast. Today I'm going to talk about Afghanistan and then some interesting stories I had when I was there, some thoughts, and then how some like the bigger picture stuff, how it points to what's going on in our society and the world today. So, quick background on me: I was in the Air Force, did intelligence, and I was actually in Afghanistan in 2010 for about 7 months. I was attached to a special operations unit. Spent most of my time in Bagram, which is the main base there, pretty close to the capital city of Kabul, which if you've been following the stuff going on in Afghanistan, a lot of the pictures and videos are from what's going on in Kabul, which is the capital city of Afghanistan. I did travel down to Kandahar a few times, which is in the south. That's where there was the most violence. And also, incidentally, when this whole thing in Afghanistan collapsed, I think Kandahar actually fell first. I did go to the west in Herat. That's on the border of Iran. And I didn't do any research, so I can't remember it off the top of my head. All this is off the top of my head. But I did end up on the east a little bit, and then a little bit to the north, where it was actually really, really beautiful. It's like just rolling hills. It's not all desert in Afghanistan. Okay, so that's my experience there. When I was there, one of my main functions was I was in charge of our linguist program and actually managing all of the linguists for that special operations unit in Afghanistan. So we had like a headquarters, and then we had a east, north, south, and west component that we had linguists assign, and I was in charge of like allocating that, negotiating new contracts. One of the biggest things I worked on when I was there was like about a $1 billion contract to fund new linguists, and also just some other stuff, dealing with just different like missions in Afghanistan that I probably shouldn't get too much into. So all in all, when I first heard about the Afghanistan stuff, a couple emotions. Like one is anger. One is like, what the fuck, like what's the point of going there, right? We moved in 2001. At the time, right, Osama bin Laden was responsible. He was supposed to be in Afghanistan and working with the Taliban. And the Taliban are local militia. A lot of their older leadership was actually trained by the US, by the CIA in the 70s, when we trained these local Afghans to fight against the Russians that were invading at the time. And you'll see a theme here, how we kind of just keep fucking ourselves, right? And then Al-Qaeda is like a bigger network, and the Taliban were sympathetic with Al-Qaeda. If I remember correctly. Again, all of this stuff is just off the top of my head. I didn't actually go research this, and I haven't really thought much about it in a few years because I own a gym now and I do other stuff. But while we were there, some things I noticed was that, one, there didn't seem to be much of a point, right? Like we would just go around, we would do our thing. We were pumping a lot of money into Afghanistan, as far as just spending, paying the troops, paying contractors, paying local Afghans. And then there wasn't a clear mission. Like it was clear very early on that Osama bin Laden wasn't in Afghanistan anymore. So then why were we still there? Why were we even there in 2010? And I had a very different perspective at the time. Right? I'm like, okay, well, we're here to actually like protect our country. We're here to actually stabilize Afghanistan, establish a new government, and change the culture. And at the same time, it was just very clear how corrupt the local government was. I would actually argue that the local government was just as bad as the Taliban, or even worse. We had a US troop presence backing them, so they were able to stay in power, right? You had to like give an analogy. It's like you have someone who's like really, really wealthy. They have a useless son, just not capable, not useful, and also kind of a dirtbag. But because he's that person's son, the son is promoted into like some position of power in a company and basically given like a very a cush job and given authority and power in the company because of more of the status, and it was very corrupt, the Afghan government. I remember like one big thing, one of our missions supposedly was that I think Afghanistan was like one of the largest poppy seed producers in the world, and then like with the poppy seed, you can make that into opium, right? And one of the things was, hey, we're actually getting rid of opium in the world, but there are all these parts of poppy seeds fields that we weren't allowed to touch because it was the president's brother's poppy seed field at the time, right? And that came from the top. That came from either the leadership in Afghanistan, our military leadership, or even further up, like from the Pentagon, right? Like just things like that, a lot of bribing going on, just a lot of, you know, just these dirt bags that we put into power, and then they just basically bled the country dry in their own way and took a lot of our resources from the US, and there was just that like shitty sun that, you know, it was very clear as soon as we stopped supporting that government, it was gonna fall apart. I could have told you that in 2010. I think most people that were there that were aware of what's going on could have told you the same thing, right? And at the same time, like in Afghanistan, one of the nicknames for the place is called the Graveyard of Empires. So even back when the Mongols invaded it, I want to say the Russians, I know there's like another big like empire at the time, it might be like the Ottoman, don't quote me on that, and obviously the US. Every single superpower of the day that went in there and tried to take over the place ended up just stalling and eventually failing. And then shortly after that, the empire actually started crumbling. You know, we'll see what happens to the US. Obviously there's a lot of turmoil going on here, but it just doesn't work out. And part of the reason is because the terrain is very, very rough there. There's areas where they're just very rough terrain with like the mountains and everything. And it's a very tribalistic country. So we tend to think of it like, oh, we establish a government, we unite the Afghans. Like the Afghans don't actually relate to themselves as one country. They relate to it as more of like a tribe. And then that's been ingrained to their culture. So when you're trying to artificially change the culture and put this government there, it was never going to work, right? And it was just clear at the time, like for every mission we conducted or terrorists we killed, we were actually radicalizing more local Afghans and creating more future terrorists. Like it was just a shit show there, and like I don't know why we were there. You know, I talked about this in like an earlier podcast. The reason why, right, we went to Afghanistan in 2001, I think it was 2003, we went into Iraq, right? And then that was Saddam Hussein, and the official reason was that he had WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, right? And then it was later confirmed when we went in there, we never found any. George W. Bush even openly admitted, like, oh, well, I guess we had a wrong intel. So we literally invaded a country, overthrew the ruler there. And Saddam is not some saint, right? He did some terrible stuff, but there are way worse dictators around the world that we could have taken out than Saddam, you know? And again, the government that we implemented in Iraq was also, from what I heard, I wasn't in Iraq, just as corrupt, very inadequate. And then I think when we moved most of our troops out, I want to say in 2012, shortly after ISIS, well, they keep changing their name, but ISIS, which is that like radical Islamic, I forgot whatever the name of the group is, ended up taking over shortly after. And right, because as soon as the US leaves, again, that shitty son who has no position being in the power or being in the position that they're in, can't handle what's going on. And then the powers that be, whoever was meant to take over, just takes over, okay? So some anger, just, you know, I didn't have anyone close to me that died in Afghanistan, but I knew people that died. It wasn't some alarming rate. I remember when I was there in 2010, we had our 1,000th casualty. So we had 1,000 people die in about 9+ years, right? Which is a little over 100 a year, right? So like, you know, you ever saw that movie Hurt Locker, where like you're driving around every day, there's just like bombs exploding, you're getting shot at, right? Like 120 people dying a year is like less than the people dying in Orlando. Now to just kind of give you an idea, like in a whole country, that's the size of like Texas, with way more people than Orlando. So it's not some like super high casualty rate, but like why were we there, you know? And then what was our mission there? And one of the things that I always felt was very off was like the politicians, right, used us as like always like a talking point, like, hey, you know, our American heroes or soldiers, you know, when you walk around, when I had to walk around in our uniform, people were like, thank you for your service. And then in my mind, I'm like, what did we actually do? You know, like we went over there, we invaded this country. We actually made it worse off, in my opinion, than before we got there, which is, you know, come on. And then you spent a lot of taxpayer dollars, and then that whole operation was used as a justification to just push all these bills and stuff through. We're like, oh, it's under the guise of national defense, so then you could just push all this stuff through and just spend all this money. And we weren't really making the world a better place. I would argue that we weren't actually making America safer, and then we actually created more future terrorists, and then we were bound to really not accomplish much, and then have that effect reverse and get worse, which actually happened by the time we left, you know. And while I was there, most people in the military, if I said this, would kind of agree with some of the stuff that I said about being in Afghanistan, but it would be really hard for them to accept that maybe the military isn't as doing things that are as honorable as we're told it should be. You know, when you're in the military, you swear an oath to defend the Constitution, and I was born in Taiwan, you know, and I naturalized with my parents when I was a kid. I consider myself an American. I love the country, you know. There is like a spirit about it. There's some principles that the country was founded on, you know, from even like escaping religious persecution back in the day to even declaring independence from the Brits, and then, you know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and like just that spirit, and some of the stuff written into like the original, the Declaration of Independence. I'm not a big constitutionalist. I think it's an old piece of paper, right? And then the times have changed. Some stuff can be updated, but the spirit of it is very noble, and I appreciate it. And it's not like our founding fathers were perfect, right? And again, if we can't even trust what the media is telling us now, right? The narrative that we're being told, because it's so different depending on who you listen to. Do you really actually believe our version of history that we've been taught is fully believable and accurate, right? So just something to keep in mind. But just seeing this whole like thing with Afghanistan, it just made it even more clear to me just how broken our political system, and then with the media aiding it, the narrative that we spin, and when I say we, it's the government along with the media to the people, and then how people just buy into the different narratives, and essentially almost like openly think it's like we don't even question what's going on, and then openly just give our money, surrender certain freedoms under the pretense that it's for your own good, or it's for your country, or it's, you know, it's for the men and women in the service. It's just very clear how broken the system is, you know. And I'll just talk about the military for a bit, because when I share my experience in the military, a lot of people think like I hated being in the military, where I disliked the military, where I had a miserable time. Like, I had a great time in the military. I was a young officer. I made more money than I ever made when I was in. I had a lot of freedoms. I was in charge of other people. I loved being in the military. I had a great time. I had very, very valuable experiences. I was sent to a lot of different places, saw and learned a lot of different things, met really, really good people. I had a great time, you know. And at the same time, as I was in, maybe I was only in for like 4.5 years, but it just became more and more clear as I was in that I was part of a giant bureaucracy, you know. We're essentially, I don't want to use the word brainwash, but told a lot of narratives that I just bought into at the time too. It was like, hey, this is the world's greatest Air Force. We have the most resources. We have the best training, which actually is true, right? But also there was a lot of parts that were broken with it. In general, I would say there wasn't that much of a difference from what I noticed between the physical fitness of people in the Air Force and then people outside the Air Force. You know, we had this physical fitness test that we're supposed to take either every 6 months or 12 months. The standards are pretty low. You know, it's like a mile run, mile and a half run, push-ups in a minute and sit-ups in a minute, and like the standards are pretty low to even pass. And then there was all these people who would get on a medical waiver. So basically, they would go see a doctor and then have some reason where they couldn't take the physical fitness test and just sit on a waiver and then not take the test. You know, the way we promoted, one was based on time in gray. So basically, how much time have you been in, right? The more time you've been in, especially a lot of the lower ranks, it was like an automatic promotion. And then then you write these like bullets for your for the officers. It was called an OPR. I think I forgot what it actually stands for, but basically you have bullets of your accomplishments, and then you quickly learn like the accomplishments is just how do you spin something, and like it's almost like you get rewarded for writing bullets really well. And then I noticed that when I was in, it's not like every young officer was great, but there was a lot of really smart, capable young officers. And then as people have been in longer and gotten older, right? Because the more capable people see the same thing and they leave. And you start getting all these people that just learn to play the system and were embedded in the system. And so you actually get up to like the colonels, which is a pretty high rank, and then like even the generals. There were very few colonels and even generals that I actually respected, you know. And it's not like I'm a disrespectful person, you know, as far as you know, there's nothing about them that actually inspired confidence or gave off a sense of feeling where they were like sharp, they had their shit together. What I saw a lot more often was people that have been in the system for longer know how to give the Air Force answer. You know, they would kind of say the right thing, and it's kind of hollow. It doesn't feel like it. And the way they do things, it was just very. It was just like a mid-level manager, like trying to make sure everything looks good on paper. It didn't feel like. It just didn't feel like we were organized and set up to win really well. And I only had 2 leaders out of maybe. I would say there's probably like 30, 40 that I came across that I was like, man, this guy's sharp. This guy has his shit together. And both of those leaders actually weren't even my normal leadership. It was actually leadership I had when I was in Afghanistan, you know, and that's a very, very low percentage. I will say this, this phrase has been coming to mind a lot more lately. So there's an author called Ayn Rand, very controversial. I don't know why some people want to make it a political thing, but she has very like strong ideas about personal responsibility and people taking responsibility in society, and how you actually produce and how much value you bring is actually the only thing that's real. And then like the illusion that you're working really hard or trying to basically make it where it's not your fault doesn't really do anything, right? Rather than focus on it not being your fault, it's like, how do you make a difference? How do you take personal responsibility? That's kind of her general theme. So she has a book called Atlas Shrugged, and one like famous quote that was said over and over from that book was check your premise, right? Or check the premise. And the whole idea is that if something can't be reconciled or it doesn't seem to make sense or seems a little bit off, you want to actually check maybe some of the starting ideas that you're coming from, right? So like, for example, if there's one right now that, hey, the government is actually out, you know, the people in charge of the government are actually their primary objective is to make sure that the country is healthy and the people are thriving and they're actually making the country as well off as possible. That's a premise, okay? And if you're starting from that place, then it would make sense that what the people in the government are saying and then how they're influencing the media and what the media is saying is actually true, right? But if the people that are in charge are actually out to consolidate power and they're looking out for their own good and then to reward a certain group of people that are their friends or also like, like colluding with them, then a lot of the stuff that they're saying and doing and the narrative they're putting out might not actually be for your own good, right? So like you check your premise, you kind of get the idea, okay? So something I always thought was, what was the premise? What was the reason why we went to Afghanistan? Where while we were there was a lot of contractors there, right? So when you're contracting, you make a lot of money. I remember for my particular job, I was doing pretty well when I was there, right? But if I was a contractor doing the same thing, at the time I would have made about like 280 grand a year. I did have to be in Afghanistan for 11 months, and then you get, I think, 2 weeks off, 280 grand, and then like the first $90,000 is not taxed, and there was a lot of contractors there. They were just sitting there playing like cannon fodder, Pac-Man, answering the chat, just kind of dicking around all day. And I even overheard them all the time, like planning on, hey, I'm gonna do this for 4 years, I'm gonna do this for 5 years and save up money, while doing the minimum amount of work, definitely not making a difference in Afghanistan and changing the culture and making the world a better place, right? And I'm not saying those people were bad, because I actually thought I was gonna do that, but like the premise, fundamentally, the whole function of contracting for people is how do I take advantage of this massive amount of money to set myself up for the future, right? And then when you're hiring a bunch of those people to conduct the mission, and they have no intention of actually helping make the country a better place or helping us win, even though there's no definition for what winning is for us, and then like leave, right? You're actually going to perpetuate the war. If a politician, their goal is to just stay in their position or move up into a more lucrative or more powerful position, and it's how do they actually gain votes or side with the right people, or if you guys are familiar with lobbying, right? So basically different, say the big pharma or some Wall Street bank or whoever has some kind of interest, and they basically pay money. Hey, you know what, we're gonna help fund your campaign. And those politicians are taking those money from those people. Is their interest with the people, or is their interest to actually reward the people that are paying them, and then basically scratch the people's back that are scratching their back, right? And then, or if you even look into our medical system today, right? It's almost like you could categorize modern medicine into two categories, right? There's a part where there's some kind of like accident, like car accident, heart attack, things where there's like miraculous, or even like sports injuries, right? Someone tears the ACL, they go into surgery, they repair it, and they're back after 6 months, and like a year later, they're actually performing just as good or even better than they were before, right? Where like my business partner, Steve, had a heart attack, coded, so basically died outside the hospital. They were able to actually bring him back, and he's been operating relatively fine for the last few years. Right? Those are miraculous things. And then there's the other part where it's almost like working in conjunction with our society getting sicker and sicker, where, okay, this person has diabetes, right? Let's address the symptom. So we're gonna control the blood sugar and do insulin, whatever, but never actually make them well. Like figure out what caused type 2 diabetes to be happening more and more often. Why is it happening in younger and younger adults and even kids? It used to be called like adult onset, and now you have like 8-year-olds diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, right? And like the modern medicine, which is largely influenced by big pharma, there's no incentive there to actually address that. Kind of like the contractors in Afghanistan, right? It just, hey, you know what? We can provide these solutions that aren't really solutions, they're just suppressing the symptoms, where these problems, which is maybe caused by our diet or whatever, and then we could just make more and more money, right? And I'll end with this, like, for those of you that actually think voting makes a difference, you know, how do we even get the candidates that we get? You know, you guys understand there's the Democratic primaries or the GOP, the Republican primaries, right? There's all these candidates, delegates, right? People that were nominated that are supposed to represent the people are the ones that are actually voting on for the candidates. And then a lot of the delegates, they actually get money and are influenced by lobbyists as well, right? You can just kind of see how like the whole system, by the time you get Biden and Trump, right? It's already been so messed up that you're forced to vote between some guy with probably has dementia and then some man-child who just throws a fit, is very disrespectful, and that's your choice. And then when we're told, hey, you know, do your part. It's your right as an American to vote, and like, if you actually want to make a difference, vote. Whereas, what about actually seeing just how broken the system is, raising that issue, and then having more people become aware of this, and then automatically the system has to shift, right? That's kind of my final message for this. I'll end on a positive note. All of this can change. And if you're really seeing kind of how broken or how many problems there are in the world, the very first thing and most important thing you can do is to take personal responsibility for yourself. You know, honestly, anything that's average is at a pretty low quality level. You know, if you're average in fitness, basically you're at 50%, that's really not that fit. If you're average in your relationship, let's just say you're married, I mean, the divorce rate's like 55, 60%, right? So if you're 50%, your relationship is actually probably not going to work out. And then never mind like the people that don't get divorced, stay together, how many of those relationships are working, right? When it comes to your education level, when it comes to the public narrative. So if everything that's average is probably not that good, what makes you think that when there's like a consensus or when there's like a majority opinion on something, that's actually like the best way to go, that's even right? But it's so easy to feel comfortable just being in the narrative, and we just kind of buy off of the emotional play with it, the polarization, where it's either side A or side B, and whichever side you pick, right, that's the side of justice, that's the side that's right, that's the side where we're doing good for the country, and the other side is the evil side, that it's their fault. If you buy into any of those, you're literally buying into a very unconscious narrative that's actually not really what's going on. You know, it's always a little bit more complicated. Just to see what it's almost always gray. I'll put it that way. And the more you could take care of yourself, where you make it a personal pride to take better care of your body, to, you know, if you have stuff that's going on mentally, to actually go do self-development or even get a therapist, or to actually be able to communicate and then express and then move some of the stuff that you've been avoiding, to educate yourself, to research stuff online, to actually learn just basic principles of how stuff works. You know, like, don't get into the conspiracy theory stuff, right? Understand how our political system works, how people get rewarded from doing certain things, and are those people that are getting rewarded actually providing values? When you understand those basics, then these fear-based narratives that just sway people left and right won't have much of an effect on you. You know, and when enough people can do that, automatically the system has to change. I don't necessarily think there's like some big evil corporation or big evil person, the mastermind, like running everything. It's just in general, people are asleep. They're not educating themselves. They're not actually in a place where the government or the medical system or the education system or the economic system has to actually evolve from whatever it was before to actually be able to support this new consciousness, you know. And that's why I talk a lot about self-awareness, and then working on actually developing the ability to be more conscious and make yourself more useful and be more awake, and also help other people be more awake. Okay, so it's kind of like a long rant. Hope you guys got some stuff out of it. Thank you for listening or watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.